black coffee.
This is the Exchange Coffee Podcasting Network. Coffee people talking to coffee people about coffee and things coffee adjacent. This episode of The Exchange is brought to you by Kavoya Specialty Coffee, where coffee is always a collaborative voyage. Welcome to the Exchange Coffee Podcast hosted by Mark Inman and Todd Mackey. This is episode 46, recorded while Mark, Todd, and Mike, that's me, attended the Roast Summit hosted by Roast Magazine in Portland during the first week of October. You'll notice from the sound that we're not in the studio but in an Airbnb where we sat down to ask the question, is coffee consumer behavior changing due to higher prices? And now, here they are, Mike and Mark and Todd. So guys, I wanted to see if we could spend some time talking about consumer attitudes and behaviors and how maybe they've changed. The reason this came up is I just wrote a blog on this, but the NCAA now does its drinking trends study twice a year. They've been doing it since the 50s, and it was an annual drinking trends survey. But for the last 5 or 6 years, they've been doing it twice a year. They do a spring study where the survey is conducted in January, and then they do a fall survey where the survey is conducted in July.
Mm-hmm. Did they ever publish like a reason why they changed?
I'm sure they did. I mean, I'd have to look into it. But, I think they're just trying to, I would assume they're just trying to capture more trends earlier.
Seasonal.
Yeah, and also seasonal. And speaking of seasonal, the difference between the two surveys is usually nominal, except for seasonal changes you would expect to see.
Pumpkin spice latte season.
Yeah, well, they don't ask that question, but you know, all the cold coffee categories go up.
Yeah,
in the summer, additives go up. Use of sugars and sweeteners because additives are more common in iced and cold coffees.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can't.
Interesting.
Yeah, I thought it would be interesting this year because we have data, consumer data from January of 2025, and we have consumer data from July of 2025. So we can literally ask the question, how, if at all, has consumer behavior and attitudes changed in the first 6 months of 2025? Mm-hmm. So, of course, the answer is, as you expect, has it changed? Yes and no. It's a little early to see any real effects of any of the stuff we witnessed in 2025.
Right.
However, there are some indications of some things that may be trending towards changing. So, first of all, there's an old inelasticity, is that the right word? Bromide in coffee that, you know, when prices go up, consumers don't stop drinking coffee or even necessarily drink less. They just change the coffee that they're drinking. So,
or the setting or just the coffee.
Yeah, the volume doesn't change. The amount of coffee doesn't change.
Right.
But, you know, they would just buy less expensive coffee, perhaps.
So the term demand crash, which is used a lot often in coffee, I've always believed it's a fantasy. There's no such thing as demand crash.
Well, I think we'll see. I mean, in the 70s, there was a demand decrease, but I don't think it was to the extent that you could call it a crash.
Mm-hmm. I've never heard the term demand crash.
Yeah, you see it in a lot of the green coffee reports when they have the market reports at the end of the day. You know, like with the tariffs now and the market being up, that the fear is that consumption is going to dive, demand crash. And I just don't see that happening. I just see it. You may not go to a cafe, but you'll drink it at home. You'll find ways to save, but the consumption you're putting down isn't going to change.
Right. So what we've seen is consumption overall is constant. I mean, 66% of adults in the U.S. had a coffee yesterday in January, and in July, 66% of Americans had a coffee yesterday. 73% had a coffee last week, in the past week, and that stayed constant from January to July. So what we're seeing is, but at the same time, we wouldn't expect to see consumers in July weren't yet feeling the effects of tariffs.
Right.
I gather you guys would know better.
Right.
So what behavior changes did we see, if any? And really what we're starting to see are changes in attitudes and some behaviors. The NCAA started asking a question about, which they've never asked before, are you doing anything, have you changed any of your coffee drinking behaviors or attitudes because of increased prices? And the answer is they are. And it's not huge yet, but the NCAA provides a list for them to choose, for the survey respondents to choose from.
Mm-hmm.
So there may be some things that we would have put on that list that aren't on the list, but they're saying things like, yes, I'm buying more coffee on sale, which is like 20%.
Right.
And then another 15% saying, and when I do find it on sale, I stock up.
Sure.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
But the other interesting piece that I thought maybe we could talk about is that some consumers are changing the format, what NCA calls format. So we see consumers shifting, for instance, from whole bean coffee to ground coffee. And of course, what that means is not that they're switching from brand XYZ whole bean to XYZ ground. They're drinking a less expensive coffee that only comes ground.
Yeah, a coffee that is packaged pre-ground.
Right.
Yep. Or, I think we were talking about this offline, but also pre-ground might mean like a capsule.
Right.
Right. Well, no, pods is actually pods.
That's a separate category altogether.
Yeah, and interestingly,
okay, good to know.
People are tending to go, if I understand the data correctly, from ground coffee to pods.
Really?
Yeah, even though
That's depressing.
Per ounce a pod is more expensive,
Right.
people aren't brewing pots worth of pods.
Right.
So they get to control their portion and avoid waste.
The perception is no waste, right? If I finish each cup,
Right.
I'm not like brewing an overage and pouring it off.
Right.
The craziest thing about that is the math would point to you can brew a small pot and dump the rest of it down the sink, and it's still cheaper than a pod.
Well,
I think the pod equals $50
That
a pound.
assumes that the input is apples to apples.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Not
True.
the case.
If in very general terms, we know the coffee prices there's a huge variance, but let's say just in very general terms, it's going to cost you $4 or more to brew a cup of good coffee.
Yeah.
Hi, it's Mike. What I meant to say there was a pot of good coffee, not a cup. But you can get 3 cups of, and most people are drinking 2 to 3 cups a day. You can get 3 cups of adequate coffee for less than $2 with pods. So I think that's the mindset that must be going. Now, unfortunately, the survey, as far as we know, didn't ask the question that we would want to ask, like is one of the options is I just started brewing half a pot.
Right.
Or I switched to a single cup cone brewer or a single cup French press. So there's some other things that might come up, but I just wanted to lay the basics and see if you guys could talk about that, what your impressions are of those changes or beginning of changes. Are those trends going to continue, do you think? And where do you think we're headed, given that we see this sort of early warning signs or early trendings?
Yeah, well, we're sitting here in the very first week of October 2025, having traversed, a crash course of changes, economically speaking, as it relates to coffee over the course of the year, the last 10 months.
Mm-hmm.
And really, I would estimate, based on, my conversations with the folks I'm working with, looking from outside, understanding everyone's positions, just broadly speaking, it would seem that we are now entering the conclusion of the first quarter where roasters, generally speaking, are taking delivery of not only higher priced coffee based off index pricing, but also coffee that has arrived to the U.S. post April 7th.
Right, tariffs.
April 5th, excuse me.
Yeah.
And August 7th, the effective tariff dates, right? So it would seem like, this is all backed up by also the release of, not only the price increases within our network that we're watching, but also like looking at the wider, more commodified market, looking at the Costco's, the Kirklands, the Crafts, the Folgers. But there have been very well publicized price increases. I don't believe any of those companies have increased pricing only once, right? They've all increased pricing more than once. And so I think we're really entering in a more kind of wholesale way. We're entering the demand adjustments, let's call them. Obviously not a crash. I have always heard the term demand destruction. I do think that's an appropriate term for subsegments of coffee consumption, for example, what you're saying, Mike, someone who would make a pot at home and is instead making a cup.
Right.
But yeah, I think, we're starting to be there and you're seeing those changes. Namely the one that seems to stick out the most to me, and it's certainly been backed up by most of our customers I deal with that are active at retail, is people brewing more coffee at home, buying whole bean coffee to make coffee at home rather than buying cups of coffee.
I would think that has the largest impact on savings. That's the easiest cut.
Well, for the cafe customer, that's a huge shot in the arm.
Right.
Yeah.
So the debate would be how long until that customer has to rethink it.
Well, they already are. And that's the one thing I haven't gotten to yet. But the QSR, quick service restaurants, are seeing a hit. And people are saying they're drinking less coffee out.
No, they certainly are. I'm saying, what about that customer that has already given up on going out to coffee, right? There's going to be a certain term, right? And if economic headwinds continue for coffee and everything else that person is consuming, there's going to be the next layer, right? Come after the holidays when you've stretched your finances buying, presents for the family, so on and so forth. And you're sort of like, okay, well, what can I do next? That person then is going to become the person, theoretically, who is not wanting to brew the pot anymore. They're looking at, what are my alternatives?
Well, they look one shelf lower.
That's what I mean. So, my curiosity is knowing that survey backs up what we're already hearing. Hey, I'm the specialty retailer. People are aiming to bring my coffee home or someone's coffee home to brew at home. When the next round hits, what's that going to look like? That second step, or when might that be? What do you think?
Yeah, and I think that I agree with you that we're just starting to see it, because the roasters just started really paying the tariffs in the past 60 days. So to roast, package, get out into distribution, the reality hasn't yet hit consumers. You're just starting to see it. I think there's the average consumer, coffee consumer, and then there's like the hardcore specialty people. I'm of the mindset that people that drink specialty are not going to go down on the shelf. It's just too big of a change in quality of life for them.
Right. Specialty coffee consumption actually went up slightly for 6 months of the year.
That consumer, I think, is safe. I think people like my dad is going to go down the shelf to the point that he can't stomach it. And that's what they're going to do. I think the biggest wrench, though, in the works that really doesn't have an answer yet because the Brazil tariffs are, Brazil's just starting to ship. So the 50% tariff on Brazil is, for all intents and purposes, irrelevant right now, because fresh coffee hasn't even hit here yet. Once it does, people that use Brazil as a backbone of their blends, I don't know if they know how to react to this yet. I think that they are hoping that something's going to change. Either Brazil manages to lower their tariff to 10%, where the rest of the world is, or the Supreme Court deems the tariffs are illegal. I just don't think they're ready to grasp the reality that this 50% may hold, because I haven't seen on a professional standpoint, and I haven't read any reports that those large brands have switched lanes on that supply yet. They have bought short-term to fill the vacuum, but they're not committing one direction or another because they don't know what's going on. And I think once that, let's just say Brazil gets stuck with 50% tariffs for the foreseeable future, I think that's going to throw a massive wrench in the works for those lower shelf brands that use Brazil in very large numbers. They just can't immediately switch. You can't just substitute that much coffee out of another country that quickly. It takes a while to develop that supply channel. So I would think there is going to be some inflection point where the Dunkin' may be more expensive than a Stumptown for a while, because the Stumptowns, doing a Peru or a Colombia or a Mexico, higher end coffee, that they spent a 35% tariff on, 35-cent tariff on, versus the Dunkin' that's paying $2 tariff on the Brazil.
I have a hard time imagining that specialty roaster would see that moment of vulnerability and not pounce on it.
Well, they don't see it. I don't think they see it, because
you don't think that
I think
that
the
cafe is going to see like the difference in the cup price. And
I think they will when it happens, and by then it's too late. That's when you pounce. You do it now. But the reality is that I've read these reports like, American roasters are backing out of their contracts. Well, you can't necessarily do that. If you've agreed to buy a Brazil and it's an estate, for example, that estate is financing that coffee for that contractor. They had to go out and buy that coffee. If it's an exporter, they just can't make it go away because you have a problem in your country. Some of these people are going to have to take delivery of this coffee and pay these ridiculous tariffs. And that's where I think the commercial brands aren't going to be able to get out of their commitments fast enough. And there is going to be a moment in time where a cup of McDonald's is going to be double the price of a cup of Stumptown. Now that window is going to be very small, and there is really nothing to take advantage of there. I mean, if you did take advantage, it would be a 3-month, opportunity.
I laugh only because I wish our listener could see me shaking my head and your immediate response to shut me down.
No. I mean, and I could be wrong, but I
think the scenario is there.
Yeah.
Like the possibility is absolutely there. I think the interesting part is to imagine how a company in that position can feather it, right? We already know, we're already hearing that the demand on forward Mexico as a substitute is through the roof.
Massive.
Right.
Yeah.
So we know that there is a shift on. I'm hearing more and more that there are, importers bringing Brazil and other coffees in and placing them in bonded warehouse so they don't have to pass through customs, with the hope that there's a nearby.
Such a short-term gamble. It's such a gamble.
It is a huge gamble, and with added costs.
Where's the break even on that?
I mean, the only way that works out is if by the time the roaster takes it, there are no tariffs, right?
You don't think, without naming names, let's say large, unbelievably large roasters.
Yeah.
At their retail establishments, you don't think that they're going to spread the costs out throughout the menu and then take a hit on the coffee specifically, rather than go to a price that.
100%. I mean, that's the next thing I was going to say is the hard part is that the real outcry isn't necessarily going to be the consumer in the case of a Dunkin', for example. The interesting part will be, how does Dunkin' corporate, in this case,
pivot,
manage their franchisees, right? Being a franchise model. The challenge for one of a big institutional roaster that sells direct to consumer by way of supermarket. I mean, they're going to deal with the public, right?
Right.
But the idea of hey, we have this array of ingredients you have to wholesale. Coffee's one of them. We can then spread this across some pricing mechanism that allows us to wash it. We can cut in less of this blend ingredient with these others. The interesting thing is that it's not. The interesting thing I feel like we lose in the context of today's discussion is that it's not just the tariff. The tariff in Brazil is centrally critical to the discussion.
For sure.
But before that, we're just hitting a real stride with all these surge priced coffees from the behavior of the market this year, which, to add dimension, weirdly, even though we spent much of September sort of in a place in a quote unquote relief position, immediately then surged back up and has now been more volatile than ever. Right?
Oh yeah, I think we were February, March of this year where the market had gone over $4.
Yeah,
we're well over $4 just when you factor the tariffs in.
Yeah,
it's a worse place now than it was. It's just
Sure.
that it's like a surcharge that's not really being addressed.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
that's an
yeah.
important. I mean, we tend to gravitate back to the tariffs, but the whole we're talking about consumer behavior changing, we're talking about as a result of almost an innumerable number of variables that we're
Yeah.
experiencing that I admitted in a podcast with Rob the other day, that I think when you take in the volume and variety of variables and things that are out of whack in terms of business as usual, that I would be willing to concede that it's unprecedented.
Oh, yeah. So you're finally...
Well, now price, I'm going to hold the line
Yeah,
on price.
we need a good sound effect
Wow.
after that one.
Yeah.
On price, I'll still say the same, but just the sheer volume, just the volatility alone,
Right.
is just nuts. And so it's all those together, and we always come back to the tariff because it's, in a way, it's the most obvious and it's the best
Well,
understood.
it's the
by
latest issue.
Well, and it's also
latest
the
issue.
most vulgar because, the coffee market rallying due to drought there's a cause and effect. Like, you understand that. But the whim of a person that upends an entire industry is insane to me. That somebody has that kind of power.
in the 70s, talking about how national roasters might respond and at the level of their consumer relationship. In the 70s, when green coffee adjusted for inflation was the equivalent of double digits,
Right.
into the teens, they threw up their hands. There was nothing. They literally knew that I cannot charge customers what I should on paper be charging customers. I just cannot. And they just basically held their breath, and they knew where the point was, and they stopped there and they took a bath after that.
Yeah, with the tariffs at the percentage point that they are, nobody can do that. Businesses would go bankrupt within a year. There's not.
Yeah, it'd be interesting.
There's no ability to
know
absorb that.
at that point in the 70s, like, what was the market composition? Like, it was probably, I mean, this is post like the consolidation of lots of little like, there wasn't the range of mom and pops.
I think it'll be interesting to see what in this survey the effect of cold brew, because cold brew uses so much more coffee to make per ounce of liquid as hot brew. At some point, if the tariffs hold and the market stays high, that cold brew is going to become crushingly expensive.
Well, cold
compared
brew
to-
specifically, you're talking about the brew methodology,
Yeah.
but cold coffee, I don't think.
Yeah,
Not
I think
cold coffee, like
yeah,
nitro brew, and these.
it comes down to low temp, long steep time. Typically has been high throw weights. I'm
throw weights,
sure. I mean, you were sharing like an anecdotal story locally, to where we come from, Mike. But the discussion is going to quickly become like operators that, especially those that are not super attached, historically speaking, to quality, are going to start lowering their throw weights.
Right.
Right?
Yeah,
Like,
you
the
have to.
logic is, hey, a little bit less brown stuff. It's the stuff that comes out is still brown.
Right.
Hot. It's not super, you don't perceive the differences as much. So I think there's a lot of room for things to be adjusted.
Yeah.
I think the place my mind goes is just, okay, at what increments are people going to
Right.
make the next choice?
Right.
Right.
Like, my daughter works in a retail establishment, and then the owner's talking about changing the coffee to ratio.
Oh yeah,
And I'm saying,
I would assume that's happened already.
oh yeah,
Oh,
and
for
my
sure.
my thought is just there's no one and done, incremental, and then
Right.
you'll see
Sure.
how far you can go. I mean, if you're paying attention to your business.
Yeah, pretty soon we'll be, going into specialty shops, and you'll get that classic Greek diner coffee that you can see the bottom of the cup through. Kidding, but they'll be that. The other thing that's so interesting, I mean, you talked about your dad and Mark, where it's like, oh, he'll essentially buy lower and lower shelf until you can't stand it. Is like, in the 70s, there was that moment of breaking where, soft drinks became a new thing. Like there is a huge caffeinated beverage market.
Well, I would
And-
assume that's more expensive still.
Well, at a point, I mean,
Yeah.
there's going to be some rebalancing. So it'll be interesting if and when we hit that type of impact.
Well, and again, lower shelf, but there's so many iterations of changing your consumer behavior. I mean, there's what I'm going to do is I'm going to have one really good cup of coffee a day.
That's where I would go.
Yeah, me too. And then I'm going to have, I have a high tolerance for a wide range of coffees. So, it's pretty easy for me, switch up the other two and do one really good cup of coffee.
Yeah.
The other statistic that I didn't talk about, which was also new to this survey, or it's not new to this survey, I misspoke. We've been asking it for 5 years. They ask consumers about their financial situation, and they say, "Are you better off than you were 6 months ago? Are you the same, or are you worse off?" And in this survey, which was conducted in July, 31% of the respondents said they're worse off.
Yeah,
and that's the highest it's ever been in the survey. It even beats the pandemic peak of 28%. And in January, it was just 24%. So just in 6 months, we've gone from 24% feeling less secure financially to 31%.
Oh, and I think that number is climbing still. I think with medical costs going through the roof, insurance costs and continuing to go in that direction, and job pressures and unemployment rising and inflation continuing to rise.
I was going to say,
time.
just say inflation, even without like the changing tides in the job market, but just inflation. And if, salaries aren't keeping up, that alone.
Right.
It's interesting. It makes me so curious if NCA can or does or could like take basic age demographic information of the respondents.
They do. Yeah. Everything I've talked about, I could cross tab by age.
Yeah. I would love to see that particular.
Well, I do know for the financial security question, it's very interesting that older people are feeling less secure than younger people.
Really?
Yeah. And it's not insignificant. It's a substantial difference.
Yeah.
So if you break it at the 40 plus below 40, I want to say it's a 9-point difference. But it's significant. 18 to 24-year-olds are down in like 24%.
Really?
And of course, Todd and I talked about this. The older you get, your definition of financial security grows.
Sure.
So someone may not. It may be subjectively easier for someone who's younger to feel secure.
Well, and I was reading on my trip up here that with the healthcare costs rising, younger people are just saying, "I'm going to drop insurance. I'm healthy." And then it rises the cost faster for the older population that aren't so healthy. And but if you cut health insurance out of your budget as a young person, that's saving you a significant amount of money right now. So you wouldn't feel as insecure.
Yeah. I also think, you have less to look at to get spooked.
Yeah.
Right. Like you're not accustomed to like taking inventory of like, hey, how am I doing towards wherever I want to end up if
my
a
financial
retirement
dashboard
is a aspiration. I mean, I think a lot of young people, young and middle-aged people, like the idea that could even be something you do. I mean, it's out the window to a lot of folks.
I also want to believe, and I could be completely wrong here, that in this climate and time, what people are going to drop first are things like alcohol, because it's significantly more expensive, and they're going to hold on to coffee. It's like the last luxury I can afford, and I will get rid of these other vices that cost me more money. But this is where I draw the line.
Yeah, I think there's evidence of that in the survey. And there's this interesting new part of the survey that I didn't even think about talking about, but it's something called coffee parties. Where a retailer, even a bar, will have a coffee party at night, and they'll just serve coffee. And of course, and younger people seem to know what these things are. And then, of course, people my age never heard of it.
Yeah, I've never heard of that.
Yeah, and so just sort of as a part of the alcohol conversation.
Yeah. Well, and you add to that, younger people in general just aren't drinking nearly as much as.
Yeah, there's a big cultural shift away from alcohol.
Yeah.
Totally. But I mean, it's great to check in on it. I think it's a really interesting conversation. I think it's surprising to me. I think it sounds like it's surprising to you as well, Mark, that the data in the most recent survey would be so definitive about the changes that people
Right.
are already making. Because in so many ways, like polling the industry, people don't feel like they've turned the corner yet, or they feel like it's fairly recent that they have. So I'm going to be glued to the release of the next one.
Yeah, January.
For
Yeah.
sure. I think it's going to be
I think
decisive.
some of the indicators are really anticipatory on
Yeah.
behalf of consumers. And we'll keep an eye on the percentage of the population drinking coffee daily or last week, and then also on cups per day. I mean, we're holding steady 3 cups today in January. The drop in July down to 2.8 is normal for the summer versus winter. And the shift isn't even within the margin of error, or is within the margin of error.
And with that, we've been The Exchange.
You've been listening to the Exchange Coffee Podcast, hosted by Mark Inman and Todd Mackey and produced by me, Mike Ferguson. The Exchange theme music is Exchange by Lo-Fi Zoo. Here comes your postscript, but stick around for some housekeeping on the other side.
The producer clamping down.
Just one audio blunder after another on it, Todd.
I'm going to give you an impossible task, Todd.
Black coffee.
If you've enjoyed this or any podcasts on the Exchange Coffee Podcasting Network, please do all the things: like, subscribe, tell 3 friends. Right now, I'll wait. You'll find a link to our listener survey in the show notes. Please take the survey.
Please, I'm begging you.
And remember 2 things. You can always email us at theexchange@kavoya.com, and Black Coffee is performed by the one and only Ella Fitzgerald.